Well, hi there, Scott again, founder of Innate Strategies and creator of Emergent Impact. Whether you watch the other Vensim tutorials on YouTube or not, this one is still essential if you want to successfully share your systems maps with your clients and or your colleagues. Through my 25 plus years of experience, I've developed a clean, clear, even compelling way to share the maps that make sure that their first impression of their map predisposes them to being curious rather than feeling overwhelmed. And as always, if you care to learn more about Emergent Impact, feel free to go to either emergentimpact.com or my Thinkific page, both at the links below. In the meantime, hope your work and world are nourishing you. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Well, hi there, Scott here. I wanted to give you a sort of a high-level tutorial on how I use Vensim. Um, it can do a lot, but I use it primarily as a storytelling device for causal diagrams. So let me first talk about it before we look down in the detail of this about it stylistically. So I make a very deliberate effort to make this look as sort of symmetrical and aesthetically pleasing as possible. And the reason I do that is there are a lot of people that build out causal diagrams and things are kind of scattered everywhere. The concern I have there is that these things are often difficult enough for people to absorb, to relate to understand, without having any sort of graphical noise in the space. So I'm very thoughtful about putting the goal at the top in a bold font at a 16 point font. The next level, the key drivers, the key resources is the technical name for them. Those are at a 14 point font and bolded. And then everything else that we talked about in the interview that's relevant as it sort of fits under the different key resources is in a 12 point font. You'll also notice that I color code each of these sections so that as we're talking about it or as they're sharing it with their teams, it's much easier to refer to than if it was all in black, which most of the maps that I've seen are. And then when I relate them, the primary arrows in the initial sort of unfoldment of the map are this smaller size. And then for the feedback loops, when these resources begin to really cause the goal to happen, and then there are feedback loops here, those primary flows, I use a thicker arrow, and I'll show you how to do that. I also include a legend down here at the bottom. This legend I keep in a separate file as a stock element that I can copy and paste into my maps as I go without having to rebuild it every time. So let me move over to Vensim now and talk about how one actually builds one of these things. So here we are in Vensim. And let me talk first about sort of the first thing that I do here. First thing I do is I go to the view and I go down and I look at the fonts and colors. And the arrows, I immediately change those colors to black. Some people use a blue for a same to same or reinforcing relationship, and a red for an opposing or um, inverse relationship. The challenge for us there, I think, is that we already have colors on the map, and if you add colors to the arrows, then it's an unnecessary level of confusion. There's another way to show an inverse arrow that we'll talk about when we get to how we do those arrows. So let me talk about the tools that we use. The first tool on the bar is the lock tool. Now you need to be aware of that little bugger, because if you happen to hit the escape key when you're doing this to like get out of something, it almost always defaults you back to the lock key. When you're on the lock key, you can't move, touch, change anything on your map. And I have been flummoxed a few times until I learned it, um, by trying to figure out how come I can't, you know, rename this variable or change this color or whatever it is because it was locked. So the keys that you use most of all are the move tool, which also has a lot of arrangement features here, but it's basically your sort of your pointer drag tool. This is an alphabet tool. It's a text tool that you use just to write down a variable, just in plain text. If you want to do it a stock flow, which I don't typically do on an individual map, but you will do in the larger maps, this is the stock flow tool. This is the arrow tool. The other tool you may well use is the comment tool. That's if you want to say something that's not a variable. I would recommend you get in the habit of using that when you want to annotate something. You don't want to use the same variable tool because it will confuse the software later on. And then this is the delete tool. So those are the primary tools you'll be using. So let's start off by going to the text tool, and let's just say goal. Now, when I say that, you'll see that that is small. That is in, if I click on it, let me get the pointer tool here. If I click on it, you'll see a couple of things. One, down here, you'll see the font size is 12. It's not bolded. So one thing I want to do right away, or at some point, I don't have to do it right away, but at some point, I don't want this big box around here, and I'll show you why. Let me go do another bit here. We're going to call this resource 1. So these are both now at 12 font. If I go to make an arrow between this and this, you'll see that arrow sits way outside, and this arrow sits quite a bit outside of these variables. In order to change that, I can do one of two things. I can either say grab that little bar right there with my pointer tool, and I can shrink this until I'm, a pretty small box. I can even get it so small that it forces that 1 down to the next line. But right now, that gives me a nice tight connection between the arrow and the variable. The other way you can do it is grab your pointer tool, click on the goal, go up to layout and choose size to content. And when I click on that, it automatically drops that down to a comfortable size. All right, so now I've got a goal and my first resource. I want to make that goal 16 point and bold. So I go down to my font sizes down here and I cursor down to 16, and I go down here and I click. Let me get down to 16 here. There we go. Click on 16, and that made it 16 point. And now I hit bold, and sometimes I did it twice. And now I've got goal at 16. And let's say I want to work with this a little easier to see for some reason. If I hold down my command key and I press the plus key on my keyboard, I can make all this bigger. So I'm going to do that. And now you'll be able to see it much easier when I go to click on the resource here. I go down to 12 here. I click the 14. That changes this. In fact, it did roll that 1 over, but I'm going to expand it. And now I'm going to choose that again. And I'm going to click bold. And again, I have to click it a couple of times to get that to happen. So now it's 14 in bold, and this is 16 in bold. And let's say I don't like the way that this arrow looks. I want it to look a little smoother. That's a part of the whole aesthetic thing. So I can grab it here and change that quite easily. And let's say that this resource affects the goal, but there's a time delay associated with it. Well, then I hold down my control key. I click on that little nodule, and there's a delay mark here. Now, you're going to want to use a time delay when the relationship between this resource and this resource are not immediate. Like, for the sake of the model you're working with, there's a significant delay between when this resource activates or builds up and it impacts this goal over here. So that's how I'm doing a resource and a goal in a simple way.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and create just a few more resources to give us something to play with. So in order to speed this along, I'm just going to sort of copy and paste these using the standard copy paste tools. Now it's going to say here that it's going to add a suffix to it because that name already exists. So this is what it'll do for you as you're building out these additional copies. What you'll do then is you'll go back, in this case, you probably won't always be copying these, but you'll go back and change that to resource 2 and go back and change this to resource 3. And that gives us something to play with. And again, we'll choose the selection tool and size that to content and size this to content. And let's distribute these to give us, let me give myself a little bit more room here. Give ourselves some room by using the select tool, the move tool to grab these things and move them. Now, here's some cool stuff you can do. Let me put these at different levels because sometimes you're laying these things out as you're thinking. If you go to the select tool, you'll see that you have these things to choose from here. This aligns everything to left, this aligns it to center, to right, to top, and so forth. They're pretty self-explanatory. So if I want to take these and I want them to all be in that aesthetically pleasing sort of same line together, I'll hit this align to top and it automatically does that for me. Now let's say I want these to be evenly distributed. Well, then I'll grab this tool here and now it's evenly spaced these. Now I want the goal to be directly above resource 2. The trick is whichever variable you select last is the one that it will orient to. So I want to be sure, since these are evenly spaced, to click that one and then choose that align center tool, and there we are. Okay, so now let's go back to the arrow tool. And let's say that when that this resource enables this resource to happen, and then the two of them together enable this resource to happen. And so I'm going to put these arrows all together, and then this resource is what really enables that to happen like that. And I'm going to get rid of this one because I want to do something different here. I'm going to say then once the goal happens, and I use the trash tool there to get rid of that. And I can click, by the way, with that trash tool, let me put that back. I can click either at the head of the arrow or I can click at this little pivot point there. All right, so now let me grab the arrow and say, as the goal becomes accomplished, then more of this becomes available. But I want to demonstrate now that same kind of thicker arrow to call that out that I showed you before. By the way, to move around the map, I'm just using a 2-finger touch on my trackpad to do that. You could use your mouse to move around like that as well. All right, so in order to change these, I can control click on this and you'll see, and I usually use the number 4 arrow to get that thickness I want. And again, the number 4 arrow to get the thickness I want. There are ways to do these in clusters, but I'm not going to trouble you with that in this simple version. All right, so now I've got my resources laid out. And then what I want to be able to do is put resources underneath this. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to color these. I'm going to say that I want this one to be, say, orange. I'd have to close that little window, and now that's orange. And then let's say I want this one to be a custom color. Now I have a custom color that I use, so I go over to one of these that allows me to put in a hex color. And let's say that there's a color I use that's a particular blue. Let's see if that takes. Now you'll see that that color's changed there. When I close this, now I've got that blue in there. And let's just say this one here, I'd like to make it, and I go back to the crayon box. I'd like to make it, let's say, oh, a dark green. And there's a dark green color. All right, now I've got colors. So when I go to drop down below that, I'm going to choose the alphabet tool and I'm going to say sub resource. And I'm going to just copy that text there, but I'm going to call this sub resource 1. I'm going to just like this sub resource. Sorry about my typing there. 2, and that should be enough. And those I'll show how these two, and again, I can collapse that by doing the size on the layout element. And there we go, size to content. Grab this arrow. Let's say that these do this, like this. And oh, by the way, this one also, as that becomes more available, this one becomes more available. And I can do that in any way that I choose to do it. I typically like to make these things look, again, somewhat rounded and symmetrical. And I could use the arranging tools to make that happen. Now, let's say there's something interesting that happens here that as more of this happens, it just so happens that as this increases, this decreases, which you'll see happen in some of your models. So I right click this and I use a dotted line to represent that. And that's what I have in my little legend that I put down here. So those are the basic ways that you say build out something in Vensim. If you then want to be able to present it to someone, you probably don't want to do that in the live model in Vensim. So what you'll do is you'll go to File. I first go to Page Setup because most of mine are relatively larger. I use a legal setup. And then to make sure everything is fine, I go to Print Preview. And I can hit this, make it large, and then I can see, okay, that's going to be okay. It's not going to hit any boundaries or anything. And I can just hit the Escape key and that goes away. And then I go to print and I do it as a PDF. And in this case, I'm going to put it in the download folder, just so I've got a handy place to put it there. And I'm going to put this, call this Vensim a tutorial and save that there. Now what I can do is the challenge there is if I go to that VensimTutorial file, which is in downloads here, there it is. I have all of this white space here, and I really don't like that. So what I do is I will open this with, because I'm on a Mac, I will do an open with preview. And then inside of preview, I'll choose, and let me get this down here where I can get a hold of it. I'll choose the markup tool. I'll choose the square tool. I'll size this where I want it. I can adjust this, to make sure I've got as much border as I want there. And then I'll choose the crop tool, save that, close that. And now when I go to look at it in Adobe Acrobat, now I've got a map that when I go to show it to my client is sized properly for us to be able to talk about. So I believe I've covered most of the elements that I use when I do a simple Vensim. If there's something you come across that you want to do and you're not able to do, feel free to reach out to me and we'll figure out how to get that done. That's it for now. Take care. Bye-bye.